Earlier this year, I was invited to help facilitate and translate for a conference that was to be an exchange between U.S. Presbyterian pastors and Honduran Presbyterian pastors. And the point of the conference was to build relationships, to get to know each other, to understand each other better. And we would do that through an extended period of time together. We spent about 4 days together. And we spent time in group discussion, in Bible study, and in worship. One of the Honduran pastors that participated in this conference, his name was Cristobal. And he, like many Latin pastors, is very passionate about Christ, about the gospel, and about evangelism. And so he shared with us all these stories of how he lives his life as an evangelist, how he gives everything he has financially, energy-wise, time-wise, to evangelizing, to sharing the message of God's love with other people, and the conflict that has caused him and his family. But his passion and his commitment were so evident that it really just impressed all of us as we talked about the overriding theme of call, and how are we called, and how do we live out that call. And he was doing that every day. And so it was a real challenge for us from the U.S. to figure out how do we make that, how does that make sense in our context? Throughout the week, we switched who was going to be preaching in the worship services. One service, it would be a Honduran pastor, and then there would be a U.S. pastor, and we switched back and forth. Our final evening together, it was a U.S. Woman pastor who was preaching, and she chose to preach on the call to Mary, Mary's song. And it was a great sermon with a lot of good messages to us about how we receive God's call and respond to God's call. But Cristobal didn't hear that part of the message. All he heard was that it was about Mary. And in Central America, many Protestants identify themselves as anything that's not Catholic. And because Mary is so venerated in the Catholic Church, the Protestants sort of steer away from anything about Mary, as to be able to distinguish themselves as a different kind of faith, that they follow Jesus in a different way. And so Cristobal's reaction to this sermon of criticism and questioning was out of that experience of his identity as a non-Catholic. Translating this exchange, got really frustrated with Cristobal because he wasn't listening to this pastor. He was reacting out of his frustration or his experience and out of his identity. And I was trying to intervene and trying to kind of fix the situation, but I was also reacting out of my own anger, wanting to tell him to listen to the message and hear what was going on. But then I just had to stop while I was translating, and I was getting a little too involved. And so I stopped, and I remembered what Cristobal had shared with us the prior 3 days of his testimony and his life. And I realized that I couldn't get caught up in that theological issue there, that I needed to step back and accept him where he was at, just as he needed to step back and accept us where we were at. And we were able to close that worship in further song and prayer, and challenged by one another, but at the same time continue to appreciate one another in our faith and what we can learn from each other.